Here it
Oh, I
comes.
see it starting now.
KBall, do you want to host? Do you want me to host? I don't really. I mean, I
It's a
don't really. It doesn't really.
conversation.
It's a
I
conversation. Yeah. Well,
I can host.
I
I'm good.
wasn't sure. I feel like I have a good direction of where I'd like this to go, so I don't mind hosting either. But
Um,
I don't. It doesn't actually.
it's confused.
I
Why
don't
is it
think it doesn't really
confused
matter.
about? Oh, it's confused because this is not right. Um, let's go. Let me save that. Let's, nope. Hmm. So is it JS party time yet is not working. So let's try. Oh, because I tried to do it. Hmm.
Earlier. Do you want me to do it?
Well, the problem is
What is the problem?
there we go. Let's try it. It was there we go. All right. Uh, it's still saying there's time to wait. We'll hit it, certainly. But we'll hit that. Other things, let's check if the YouTubes are working.
Oh, I see all these messages from you that it's like you're like attempting the command.
That's it. Okay, it looks like YouTube is working. So
Alrighty. Oh my god.
here we go. See what happens, Amal, when we change the dates all around? I gotta just stick to Thursdays.
Oh man. You know, I'm sorry. It shouldn't be complicated. It's like
Mm-mm.
this is one of those like it's not. It's this is a
All
design
right.
problem, not.
Adam, you want to hit the tweet and then maybe at least turn vid off so that we're
Let me turn my video
Oh,
off,
do we
camera
really need
off,
to tweet about this? I'm like,
and
oh,
I'll mute my
Adam's
mic
got it.
too.
to tweet about this.
All right. And
I like.
then Amel, are you ready?
Yeah, I need to like start getting off camera for live videos. I'm like not always like in the mood to be like on the internet, you
Oh
know.
no.
So I need to
Wait,
have
that
like a little avatar from now on.
you're on the not in the mood to be on the internet? All right, where's the intro? I'm going to hit
No,
start.
not on video. This is a pod.
Tweet
I
is
signed up
live.
for a podcast. Remember
All right.
that. Hi, Adam.
Ready?
I still see your thing on my screen, Adam. But yes, like I have like a. I'm sure you're showing up on YouTube.
On YouTube, he's not on there, so we're good.
That's so
Yep.
interesting. How do I collapse him?
Riverside is smart. All right. Ready?
Yes.
Hello, JS party people. The sound of those lovely BMC beats means it is time once again for your favorite party about JavaScript and the web. I'm KBall. I am, I guess, your co-host today because today we have just two of us. Amel and I are going to sit down. Well, I'm standing. Looks like you're sitting.
I'm
Uh,
sitting for now.
we're going to hang out for an intimate conversation about careers as software engineers and potentially managers. Amel, welcome. How are you?
Hello, K-Ball. Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. Yeah, I'm super thrilled to, I think, go down memory lane uh, in this show today. I think both K-Ball and I will be speaking from very personal experiences. Um, but I think for me, that journey from, junior to mid-level to senior to staff to principal to distinguished engineer, or if you decide you want to go another route, going into product or going into engineering management or going into design. I mean, it's there's so many things. And I think we'll probably be focusing today more on the like IC to manager journey, as you know, because I think both of us have done that. So I can't speak too much about like transitioning to product or design, but we had a really good show on that that we can link. So yeah, so super thrilled, like very excited.
Yeah. Well, so before we get into kind of diving deep on any of those points, should we set the context? Do you want to share your career journey thus far?
Yeah, but I'm gonna turn it around you first.
I'll go first. Okay. So my career journey thus far. So I got into tech by accident. I did not study CS. I studied physics in college, and when I graduated, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I didn't want to do physics anymore. But I knew where I wanted to be because I had been in this long distance relationship for 4 years, and so I was going to go to where my girlfriend was. It turned out she was at Stanford, so I went to Silicon Valley, and I started looking for a way to support myself. And one of the things that I stumbled into was what was essentially a testing job at a startup. It was called Benchmark Engineer, and it was conceptually it was performance QA. We were testing our products. The company was doing supercomputing products, both hardware and software. And I started out doing very manual testing. But what this did was it gave me an entry into the tech industry and a place where I could learn from. And so I started teaching myself. I had done some coding, but I was not super strong. You learn a little bit in physics. I'd done a little bit as a hobbyist, but I started teaching myself much more. And first, it was building test harnesses. I built a harness in Perl, and then I rebuilt it in Python and was teaching myself those languages. And then I started to get involved in the product development piece and things like that. And eventually, after roughly 3 years, 2 years at that startup, and then 1 year at the company that acquired that startup, I was ready for a pure software engineering job. Now, within that time there, I kind of was promoted within this sort of performance and benchmarking path, uh, which is kind of interesting thinking about it in retrospect because they followed a similar path. And in fact, I got all the way to, they were calling me a staff engineer, partly because at the acquisition close, they were trying to get us high salaries, and they wanted that salary band. But I didn't really know anything about those things at the time. But after that experience, I started looking. There was a bit of a career detour. I actually was burned out. I left. I spent a while volunteering. I can go into that if it's interesting. But ended up starting looking for a pure software job. Ended up at a startup called Causes that was doing political and social activism online. And we caught the Facebook app boom. We were for a long time the largest non-game application on Facebook, which basically meant I got to experience a web application in hypergrowth. We went from about 1 million people using the application when I was there to over 150 million people using it in over the next 2 to 3 years. And so that was very intense, very fun experience. Learned a lot about scaling a web application. That was when I learned about Ruby on Rails, and really, like, in that situation, kind of climbed my way from the back end to the front end. I remember interviewing there. I had never done web stuff at all, and I was doing a coding project as the end of the interview series, and it was like digging through the file system and figuring something out. There was something they needed, and they wanted an output at the end. And I said, okay, how should I format this output? And they said, well, why don't you just do it as an HTML list? And I was like, sure, great. What's that? For a web application job. But I had been transparent the whole way along that, like, I don't have a web background. I'm excited to learn. I'm happy to learn. Like, here is what I can do already. And they were fine with that. So they said, oh, you just, put a UL tag in front of it, put each item in an LI, and there you go. So I did that, and it was fine. And they liked me enough. I got the job. Let's see. Going on from there, I left that job after moving for personal reasons, and ended up co-founding a startup. Spent about 3 years on this startup. We were ultimately killed by Amazon getting into our space and out advertising us and driving our margins to essentially zero. It was an e-commerce space. And so that was ultimately a failure, but I learned an incredible amount in those 3 years. My co-founder and I took a piece of technology we built, spun it into a new startup, went through an accelerator in LA, started building that up. But about that time, my son was born, and I discovered very quickly I could not both be a startup co-founder and the dad that I wanted to be. And so I stepped back. I spent about 6 months extracting myself gracefully from that, and spent the next year and a half working as a contractor so I could work part-time. I worked 20 hours a week, roughly. Spent the rest of the time taking care of my son. Did that until my second son was born, and then we moved again back to the Bay Area. I decided I was ready to go back to full-time. I hit my limit on childcare. And so I ended up looking for another company, ended up at a small company called Zerb, which was a design studio, which was super fun. Got to learn a lot more about front end. I had been, a side note,
Zerb was like all the hot stuff. Zerb and Zerb
Zerb was the hot
Foundation.
stuff.
And back in the day, yeah, Zerb was like
Zerb
it
Foundation.
was
Well,
like
and I got
yeah,
to lead
Twitter
the foundation
Bootstrap,
project.
Zerb, the whole thing. Yeah. Oh wow, that's so cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
remember reading that about you a while ago, and I never got to talk to you about it. I was like, oh yeah, oh my God, like I can't believe I'm
app.
like talking to the guy who helped work on like
I mean,
or
I
lead
led it in later
apparently.
phases, right?
Yeah,
Like, so I
still,
was not the
that's
first
huge.
starter on it. Like, it had been around for a while, but I led the project for about a year and a half or
That's a
so.
big deal.
Um, yeah. One side note I should put that was, I think, important in my career journey, though I didn't realize it at the time. When I was in San Diego and I was doing this startup, I was a part of the local Ruby meetup scene, and I was at the startup. I was the co-founder. Early on, we didn't have any other developers. I was having to do everything, and so I really wanted to get better at front end development in JavaScript. This was probably 2010, 2011, right? Like JS was starting to get big. Like jQuery was the new hotness, right? There was lots of good
Hmm.
stuff going on. And so I started asking people, I said, is there a JavaScript meetup group? Like, I love the Ruby meetup group, but I want to learn more JavaScript too. And everyone I talked to said, well, yeah, we talked about that, but it never happened. So eventually I said, well, F it, I'm going to do it. I got one of the organizers from the Ruby meetup group to help me, and we started San Diego JavaScript. And that meetup group took off. Last I checked, it's still going. They're over 4,000 members now. They're the largest tech meetup group in San Diego. And the one of the things I discovered in there that I think is important for this career side is, like, you don't have to be an expert to get a reputation for a technology. If you get involved with helping organize stuff around that technology, people will assume you're an expert. So I was not great at JavaScript, but because I was leading the San Diego JavaScript meetup, everybody assumed I was good at JavaScript. They'd come to me with JavaScript questions. They'd ask me for like help. They'd ask me for referrals to people who could work on stuff. And because of that, I ended up becoming an expert because I had to, because all these opportunities were coming along. But I did not start there. So asterisk, career hack, if you have the time, go and help organize a local meetup group or technology group or something like that. Like, getting involved with the community is a great way to get credibility, get opportunities, and learn a ton.
Learn and just like yeah, just like infuse yourself in all the I think like the myofascial like elements of technology, which are like all the nuances and like understanding things from different perspective and like all the all the having nuanced conversations with your colleagues. It's like it's great. Yeah, community is like a pretty big part of my story as well, and I'm eager to share that. Although, my
Yeah.
God, I'm like, my God, you're going into like, I think I asked for like or you asked your own question that you're answering, but I interpreted your question as like a
Very high level.
like
Maybe
a
I should.
summary of a resume, and you're going into like the expanded curriculum, like
Maybe I
the
should
expanded
summarize
CV.
more. But I was
It's
also
okay. No, no,
thinking,
no, no. This is fascinating. Go. I mean,
well, for a conversation about career, and I want to hear the same level of detail from you, because I think one of the things that is important for people to see is that there are many different paths,
that's a good
and
point.
there are twists and turns,
Yeah.
right?
I
And
guess, yeah, I agree. And I really appreciate you saying that because for me, like, I think I try to hide the ugly parts a lot. And just as an engineering lead and someone who's been in this industry for a while and in a leadership capacity for a while, like, yeah, like fucking, it's like, excuse me, hiding over the ugly bits and is like the job, you know? It's like you have to learn how to, like, what fire can you let keep burning, and like what can you, like, you know, what can you get done despite, is like, that's like the motto, you know? Like, because like constraints are shifting, priorities are shifting, requirements are shifting. It's this chaosville, like this like textbook experience that people talk about as the, you know, agile software delivery or whatever the hell else. Like, it's not like we do not have it figured out,
No.
like
Well,
at
and
all. So
another, I think,
it's
important thing
just,
is to realize all this stuff is transient, right? Like
yeah.
up until Zerp Foundation, I think is still going, though they handed it off to a different caretaker who's a different company and has his own agenda and various other things. But other than that piece of software,
Yeah.
I think up until that point, every other piece of software that I worked on along those way is dead. Like nobody's using it. Um,
Yeah, and well, that just goes to the shelf life of software too. It's like if you have like code that you've written and it's in production for 6 months, you should consider yourself like lucky. Like that's great. Like your code is still the same code that hasn't been edited or written over, or you know. So yeah, like we're constantly, yeah, we're all painting over each other's bits on
totally.
the canvas, you know. But anyways, but for me, it's like it's the ugly bits are not just like the challenging parts of any job, because every job, like in tech, especially at a company that's writing meaningful software, like comes with so many different challenges. Like the code is usually this like the that's not the challenge. Like the code is the easy part. It's like getting to the code and getting to like being able to ship the code, deploy the code, right? Like getting to a place where you can write the code. All of those are usually the challenges. So, you know, so for me, it's just also just like the culture. Like, I think like we don't have, I don't think we're all operating at a sustainable pace. And there's a lot of injustice that happens as a result of that on so
Yeah.
many
Well, one thing
levels.
I kind of blew past, but I should highlight, right? So the first three jobs that I mentioned, I ended
Yeah.
up burning out
Oh, yeah.
and left and
Yeah.
did nothing for a little while, right? So like
Standard
the
par for
first
the
one,
course.
startup, they acquired us. I burned out. I left. Was like probably 6 months without a job as I recovered from burnout, and also did a bunch of interesting volunteer work. I actually worked on the Obama campaign in 2007, which like directed me in a different direction and stuff. But then the next one, right, co-founding, went through that, left that, and totally burned myself out.
Yeah.
Or I was totally burned out. I left. I ended up doing contract work and working part time for a while. Took probably a year to recover from the burnout there, though part of that was I was still working a lot of that just part time. And then um, oh, I missed one. Causes. Yeah, when I worked at Causes before co-founding, burned myself out, left, spent a while before I ended up co-founding. I think the only time I stopped burning myself out was actually when I had kids and they pulled me in a direction of work-life balance. And that's, I think, a good
Oh
conversation to have when we
man.
talk about
That's
careers
that's
is
gonna be my hack. That's
what does
I
work-life balance look like? I am before I had kids, I imagined that work-life balance was like someday I will learn how to relax and let go of working so hard, and like it will be this like I guess I want to say like passive or relaxed feeling of balance. And for me at least, that was completely mistaken. For me, work-life balance requires life to pull just as hard as work.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can relate to that so hard. But honestly, I've found just in the recent months, I've found I have had the most work-life balance like ever. And I think it's and it started with like me acknowledging that I'm the problem. It's not work, in the sense
Yeah,
that like I don't have boundaries with work, or I don't have better boundaries with work. And so, you know, it's actually on me. And it's like,
totally.
and it, you know, yeah, because I was, you know, at a place that like good work-life balance generally. So, you know, So I had a chance to actually practice restraint with myself for the first time, and I think I finally feel like I'm over, like, yeah, I'm over the wall there. But I do agree with you. Like for me, I feel like kids are just like a great reprioritizer of
I mean,
life.
it could be kids, it could be a
So
hobby, but
could be,
I think the thing there is work will always pull, and not
yeah.
necessarily in a negative way, right? Like work is
No,
interesting.
no,
There's a
that's
if you
the
have a
point.
good
Yeah,
job, there's cool stuff there. It's always going to pull you to spend more and more time, and so you need
correct.
something that is not work that is going to pull you just as hard in the other way. And for me,
Mm.
that was kids, but I think it could be a hobby, it could be travel, it could
It could be
be a
social
partner,
life, all kinds of things.
social
Yeah,
life.
and I think that's for me. Like I feel like I probably have like the healthiest balance of like my time is really well balanced these days, and I think that's also another thing. Just like you said, having that equal pull. But anyway, so don't let me, you were talking about your career journey.
I
So let's
mean,
where
let
do
me
we go
give
back?
the abridged
Abridged,
ending.
yeah, abridged ending
Yeah,
sounds good.
worked at Zerb for a while, laid me off. I started a consulting company, ended up doing what today would be called fractional CTO work. Then ended up getting sucked into another startup, worked at Humu for 3 years. They ended up with a what I would call a cultural collapse towards the end. Resigned. Have been working the last 7 months as a coach independently, which I guess is the fourth business that I've started. So there's an entrepreneurial vein that weaves through here. And now I decided I miss working with the team, so I'm looking for a new team to join. And I think one thing that we should talk about that will come up, or that has happened here, is ever since that first co-founding experience, I have, which is I guess a little over 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I've been on this sort of manager staff engineer pendulum that is pretty common, where I'll be working as a staff engineer, I'll start managing some people, maybe move all the way to all of my work being management, and then the next job be back working, in
Mm.
technology, and then start managing and kind of going back and forth along those. Often within an individual job, I will go into a job as an engineer, and then within a year or so, I'm managing people. So that is, I think, a pattern that shows up in a lot of careers. I think you may have had some experience with this as well,
Yes.
and so that's worth highlighting there. But let's get on you. Tell me about your career journey.
Yeah, thank you, KBall. Yeah, I don't know. I definitely had a different path than you, but lots of echoes of similarity at this as well. It's interesting. Which just goes to show that you can kind of get to the same place in different ways, which I think is so cool. But anyways, so yeah, I studied biomedical engineering in college, and I went to a tech school, and so I was surrounded by people who were programming and doing all kinds of things. And so my first exposure to code was through kind of writing scripts for this project, and like it was in Python, and like really fell in love with it, and like that kind of got me like kind of hanging out with folks like all the CS nerds and people who were starting companies and stuff like that. And so got involved with like hackathons, and just kind of like never really looked back after discovering that. So I had like did co-ops in biomedical engineering, and internships, and had like a really great job offer lined up, paying higher than what I made as my first when I was a junior engineer. Like I walked away from those opportunities to kind of pursue like reset on my career very early, and I said, and I spent some years doing entrepreneurial work and consulting for um, into like different startups in the Boston area, just doing like contract work for them. And after my own, this is after I did some entrepreneurial stuff with my friends. We tried to like start a company, and so it was, after kind of doing that for a few years, I was like, okay, cool, like ready for my first like actual job now, like, and so I went and became a junior engineer at a pretty large educational technology company, and just the ranks, getting promoted every year, and uh, then left to another ed tech company, and just kind of like made my journey from like junior to mid to senior kind of within the span of like 4 years. And it was a lot of hard work and like really just aggressively punched up. Like I wouldn't have minded actually being a mid-level engineer for a few more years before I tried to get that senior title, like I think I would have probably been better served. But I was just ambitious, power hungry, not power hungry, but I was ladder hungry.
Can I jump in on that a little bit? Because I think
Yeah.
there's a few variations of that I think are common. People who are
Mm,
looking to rise really rapidly, sometimes people who want to go to management really rapidly, and
mm-hmm.
sometimes people are pushed there as
Right.
well. And there's one particular angle to that I want to highlight here. So
Mm,
if you are good with people, which often has happened by survival or
mm-hmm.
for survival by women or minorities in tech. Oftentimes women in tech, other minorities in tech, have to get good with people just to survive because there are things against them. Um, you will get pushed to become a manager, and I see this all the time with women who are strong in tech and they start getting pushed. Oh, you should be a manager. You're so good with people. You should be a manager. I had in my first job, I started going almost that direction because I was, despite not being
Oh,
a
you're
woman,
so good. You
reasonably
should
good
be
with
a
people.
manager.
Well,
Okay,
I was
well.
around people
Has
stuff,
anybody ever told you that you're good with people?
but
Just
I had
kidding.
a director who, like my skip level,
Mm.
who said to me, Kevin, you're going to get pushed to be a manager. It would be a shame if you did that before you had the experience of really, going deep on technology and shipping products of
Right.
your own.
Agreed. Yeah.
Like you should not do that. And I
I
want
give
to
that
echo
advice
that
to
out.
DevRels. I give that folks to folks thinking about DevRel. Folks who are excited about developer relations. I'm like, spend 5 years as a software engineer shipping code to production before you consider DevRel because you just being a software engineer and understanding the challenges and the constraints that a software engineer is working in, it's like that's gonna make you a more DevRel. Like,
Yeah,
like the more time you have in engineering, you'll be able to kind of tell that important story that developer folks in developer relations do. So
absolutely. So, I
yeah.
mean, and I don't want to say, like, if you actively find yourself disliking coding, but you still like tech and you want to move in one of these directions, like, that's different. Do that, whatever. But, like,
Mm,
if you still love the code, don't get let yourself get pushed into one of these less technical roles just because you are also good at people.
mm.
Those skills are extremely important in the higher levels of IC engineering. And also, the more technical background you can amass, the more effective you will be when you do become a manager or something else.
Oh yeah, 100%. And we'll get into kind of I think the these type like the qualities that you need I think to kind of to get to each role and then to surpass it. But at the higher levels of IC kind of the IC ladder, your communication and people skills are like more important than your technical ones because you're there to kind of build alliances, you're there to influence, you're there to get people on board, you're there to sway hearts and minds. So there's a lot of like maneuvering that you have to do throughout the organization, and like you're not going to be able to do that without any of those other really important skills. And so just like know that,
Totally. Your
yeah, it's
technical skills are
holistic.
still important, but they're table stakes,
Yeah.
right? They're what get you the seat at the table where you can then apply these other important skills to have the impact you need to have.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. How it happen? That is basically your job title as a high level, like a senior IC. I
Totally.
make things
Uh,
happen. Yeah.
anyway, I interrupted you a little bit. Let's come back into your career journey.
Yeah. It's okay. This is fun. And so, I think for me, I was very lucky when I was first starting in, I think, corporate settings. My first corporate, real kind of quote unquote real job in tech was, just in this environment where people like were very introspective, and they really had a good culture and process around engineering and collaboration, and they never were afraid of saying that something failed. There was a blameless culture, and it was the culture of learning and knowledge sharing as well, and a culture that valued like pair programming. And so I got to really very grateful to folks, but I got to kind of really like learned from a lot of really good engineers very early on, and very senior engineers. And and I was lucky to be in that environment that and it fostered that. I think part of it was because it was a slightly larger corporation. They had the resources, and so I always tell this to folks who are just starting out, like, the larger a company you can land at for your first job, the better, because I think it gives you room to flail a little, and there isn't, like, you're not a single point of failure, and there aren't, ton of expectations on you, and there's some support for you to learn. And so I'm a fan of starting at
Interesting.
larger companies for junior folks.
I go the other way on that.
I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear your perspective on that.
Well, the main reason is if you are driven and curious
Mm.
um, at a startup, you can sort of go into whatever parts of the work are interesting to you often, because there's always more work than there are people to do it. And so your ability to kind of explore and take on more and more and more um, is much higher than I know several people who started at large companies and ended up getting slotted, essentially, and they could go deep in one thing, but they couldn't explore. I think it probably depends a lot on personality. And
Yeah,
so,
I think that's fair, but I have to say, though, one thing that you're overlooking is that, like, that kind of culture at startups is certainly a thing, but more often than not, what happens is, like, a lot of expectations put on people that are junior, and a lot of bad code gets shipped as a result, and a lot of bad practices are embedded early on as well, and so for me, it's kind of like being a baby, the way I see it. Like, your first few jobs, like, they're setting the culture for how you operate, and, like, how it's like where you learn your kind of craftsmanship, and so just be picky about that culture. I to say that, especially when you're like, I just need a job, but,
I
like,
mean,
just
that is
you
the
know
other piece here, right?
or
Is
just
like
be
the
aware
first
of it
job.
anyway. As long as being aware that at least this is not the best way to do it, that alone is enough.
If you have options, right? But the
Yeah.
first job is also probably the hardest job you'll ever get, right? Like, getting once you have that first job, you establish a little bit more of a track record. You have some work that you can talk about. You have a network that you can lean on. Finding your second job is so much easier than your first job. And so, in some ways, like, what we're talking about here is almost if you have the privilege of choice.
Yeah, if you have the
If you
privilege of
don't,
choice. But the KBall, like, I mean, I meet quite a few folks entering the industry, or junior folks, that, like, do end up actually having to, choose between one or two options, or more. And so there is certainly a choice element here. And I think I understand, and I 100% agree. It's a privilege to have the choice, etc., especially for your first role. But I think there's nothing wrong with, like, set as well, like, in your search, and making that intention of saying, like, this is actually, like, this is the type of place I'd like to end up, right? So I think even just being aware that, like, because I mean, sometimes, like, it's like you don't know what you don't know, right? So I think
totally,
being
totally.
aware that, like, yeah, like, software best practices, or in general, like, are a thing. And early on, you want to be, like, exposed to as many of the right things as possible. So
Totally. It's
yeah.
also it's easier to get a job if you have a job. So if you get an opportunity and it's not your ideal place and you know that, you can get there, get started, and immediately keep looking for that better opportunity.
Yep, that's turn down job. You don't turn down interviews, offers, right? So, like,
Exactly.
I know, although for me interviewing is terribly stressful, in the sense that, like, I would never want to just interview for fun. I'm serious about, like, potentially accepting, but yeah, but anyways, so I digress. So where were we?
We were talking about growing up in a big company and then next steps in your career journey.
Yeah, so I guess at some point after I was senior engineer for a little while, I ended up at a really great place, called, just, you know, did a few more jobs, etc. I ended up at a really great place, called Boku, and that was really like my first exposure, like the expansiveness of the web. Before that, I was like working on features and engineering, right, where you're building something for a customer. Boku was my exposure to like there's standards and there's people that help shape these standards and they argue a lot and it takes a long time, but they usually get it right in the end. Sometimes they don't and then they fix it. And just so that was really cool, and I got to also just work on like a really incredible product with some really just incredible engineers, just all the unique one-off stuff. That Boku was like a web consultancy. They kind of do standards work with a lot. They also do like they also build like really cool web apps for all kinds of businesses, from like Disney to like United Nations to like you name it. Microsoft. People go to them for JavaScript expertise. So that was a place where I got to also just like really level up on my understanding of JavaScript, how it's made, all that jazz. And there, yeah, after Boku, I was hungering for more leadership. I was like made a tech lead towards the later part of my time at Boku, and I was a project lead. I was just like I felt like for a while I'm always the person that's like at the front of the line, that I go in and like I really enjoy working with stakeholders, and I really enjoy being the like glue person and like kind of doing the like direction setting. I think I'd really like to maybe be a director one day, but I need to be a manager first before I can do that. And so I was like, all right, let me try. Like I think I'm gonna like just transition into management, and I did that at a place called NPM, and it was a
Just a
really
little place. Some people
just
may
a
have heard of it.
just a little place, and it was an incredibly humbling experience in every way. Like just the complexity of NPM and the company and the tool and the product and the code and all of it, kind of along with being a new manager, but then also you know um, just a lot of things that were happening to the company at the time because it was getting acquired. It was just, I felt like it was like 3 years crammed into like 8 months. So like that's what it was. And yeah, so after the GitHub acquisitions happened, there were layoffs, and that was my first kind of experience with that. Previous to that point, I had pretty much left every job for another better job or a higher paying job, and never had I kind of been met with that type of like what felt like rejection, even though it's obviously not, right? And so I think a lot of emotion for me, I think after that, and I think that was like my first taste of like, oh, there's this whole yeah, like you are not important to a company, like you are just like a number, like and like I think I like actually internalized and understood what that meant for the first time. And and so after that I decided, I management was great and maybe I want to do it again someday, but I think an IC for now, and what's the highest level IC that I can be. And at that point I was kind of already like, pretty much almost at the staff level. And so I became kind of I really, it's like a senior, like I guess it's like I would consider it the level of maybe a staff engineer at a very, very large company, because this 2,000 people. But my title was principal software engineer, but really I consider it like the
Well, and that's
staffy,
a thing to note is like all of these
senior
titles,
staffy. I don't even know.
especially as you get up into the upper levels, like
Yeah,
they're, they're not clearly defined.
it's true.
They're anything but clearly defined. And they may be defined well within a company, right? Like if you ask, what does a distinguished engineer versus principal versus staff mean at Microsoft or at Google? Like they probably have
Oh,
clear
they're
definitions,
different. Yeah,
but they're
at
going to be different
Microsoft.
across companies.
Yeah, at Microsoft, principal is more like staff. But yeah, so I mean, title wide, I think I was looking for like highest level IC that I could be because I just I needed to have that same level of autonomy and ability to have leadership. And um so I became a principal engineer at this, company that was like the hot thing at the time. It was a unicorn out of Boston called Indigo. It's I was working on this product that was basically like Uber for agriculture, and it was like pretty cool. Very interesting time in my life. There are a lot of really smart engineers work there, good culture, and it was fun. It was like a fun job, and then they just kind of started to culturally shift because they were starting to make some really bad product decisions, and there was just around because of that. So I think for me, I was like, this, I feel like I'm gonna, if I stay here any longer, I'm just gonna be doing the same thing I was doing a year ago. Like, I didn't feel like I was gonna be faced with like more interesting challenges because they were just kind of at a standstill with their product. And it's sad because they actually ended up like a month after I left, like a couple months after I left, my whole part of our org just got shut down. Like they were consolidating product. So I guess I had good timing, but left Indigo and I joined Stripe as a staff engineer. So that was also just a huge milestone and like a whole new set of challenges. So I was exposed to like, Valley, not quite Valley, full Valley, but like pretty close to it, like culture and just the competitiveness and the like the like lack
I
of
think
work
Stripe
life balance.
is out on their own in some
Oh,
ways there. I mean, I've worked at a number of companies in the Valley. I live in the Valley, and there's wide variation. And so they kind of embody, from what I can tell, some of the stereotype of just like super uber competitive.
yep,
They're almost bro culture, like go go go.
yep,
Um, that
accurate.
100% exists in the Valley, but there are many
Mm,
companies in the Valley that do not buy into it.
mm,
um, but
yeah.
it's just to say your mileage may vary. Don't assume that you can't find a great company in Silicon Valley to work for. Also, sounds like Stripe was not that in your experience.
Yeah, no, especially at the time that I joined, I think, it was definitely a different company, I think, a few years ago. But when I joined, it was just going through a lot of growing pains. They hired like all the best people they could, paid them lots of money, and like I think didn't quite really think about what it means to grow that quickly in such a short period of time, and like what it means that you're gonna maybe have to change your culture too, right? To like have a bit more structure, right? So like when you're a big company, you're almost kind of almost at 10,000 employees, and you want to still act like a small company, like that's painful to employees. And
Yeah.
so I think that's really where I kind of wasn't a happy camper. Yeah, I ended up leaving there because I was miserable. And also just unfortunately there was a bit of toxicity where I was too. Like our entire project, like everyone left, like people were leaving before I left. My manager left 2 months after I left. Like it was just I was on a pretty toxic project. And yeah, I like happily kind of at another large corp right now. Um, and I'm an engineering manager again. And it's and it's a decision that I made by choice. Like, yep, ready to be this again, and I'm really like enjoy um yeah, like talk about all of that, but that's kind of my
Yeah.
journey and like
So
that's a
now
very very abridged journey, but
now we have our two abridged and yet still somehow very long journeys
it's like
on the
70
record.
minutes later.
Let's talk about some of those transitions and what's needed at different points.
Yeah.
I think to me, there's a key transition that happens somewhere between like either some places have this at like a senior 2, some people have it senior to staff, something like that. Like up until that point, you can go junior to mid-level to some levels of senior, essentially focused on how do I get better at delivering technical work? How do I uh, you know, get deep expertise in some area? How do I learn about the adjacent areas? How do I better deliver code and ship product? Their ship product has an asterisk because there's lots of non-code pieces in that. But and then at some, when you get to, as I said, I've seen places talk about this as senior 2, places talk about this as staff. You could talk about it. Some places have tech lead as its own level in some ways, but there's a big shift that happens. Do you want to talk about how you experienced that and what you see as the big things that happen there?
Oh yeah, that makes sense. I think it's so hard to talk about your career in in a short period of time. I left out a lot of really important things, like when I first became a tech lead, and how community was a pretty big accelerator for my career, both in like giving me the confidence to excel, as well as just the network and like and the accelerated learning and all of that. And so so community's really just been like it's like the arteries for me, career wise. But like shifting into a tech lead, from was just, and then staying in that, I was a lead for many years at few, and so it's game changing. It's kind of like, I feel it's like that when you go from like having no kids to having kids, like it's like it's like that sense of responsibility that you like when you're not a tech lead, I feel like, yeah, work is important and whatever. But when you're a tech lead, like, and you're the person that's maybe responsible, accountable, you're the one who's giving status updates on behalf of the team, you're the one who's in more meetings, there's just a ton of responsibility, and I think for me the challenge was always like not having enough time, like hands on, always kind of trying to fight for that was a challenge. It was like, I really just want to spend more time on the keyboard, and I want to spend time on the hard stuff, and I want to spend time on the stuff that's going to make more time for everyone else, like I want to get ahead of the team and like carve the path so that like they have what they need to just keep going, like, or they have a direction, they have a pattern, they have something. And so that was always a challenge, is just your time is so split between like leadership duties and it's always time to
Should we
code.
lay out a little bit what those leadership duties are?
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, like, it's just kind of like helping manage the team's backlog, right? So for me anyways, like, you want to make sure that like we have a strategy for how we're going to break down the work and organize it. You're maybe working with your product manager, depending on what type of team you were in. You're making sure that like we have the dependencies fleshed out, like, that we have everything that we need, that this work is in a ready state. And so for me, it's often like helping define or refine requirements. It's yeah, just also just triaging different issues that come up bug wise. It's so it's a lot of like, I spent a lot of time in the future when I was a tech lead, like where like I'm thinking ahead a lot, and then some time in the past, like cleaning up tech debt and like dealing with architecture smells or whatever. And then the amount of time I spend in the present is just like in code, mostly code review time, and because even the problems that I was coding for the future. So so my like time in the today and now was mostly with code reviews and
I
team
like the way you
meetings.
think about that in terms of time. I often
Yeah.
think about it in terms of like at the earlier stages you're working on solving problems, and as you move up and become a tech lead or other things, you're working on defining problems.
Oh yeah.
How do I figure out what are the problems that we
Yeah.
need to solve? And honestly, I think that plays out even as you keep going up higher, right? So you're not just talking about, like, as a tech lead, you're dealing with that for one project. You're saying,
Right.
okay, what are the problems we need to solve here? How can I break this down into solvable chunks and problems that our engineers can execute on? And
Mhm.
maybe if I have extra time, I'll be doing some of that execution. But mostly I'm setting them up for success by saying, here's a problem you can take and execute.
Yeah.
I think as you keep going up, or sometimes, if you're in a staff engineering role but not leading a project right now, the same thing is true for other types of problems. You might be identifying, okay, what are some of our architectural problems that are going to bite us in two
Oh yeah.
years? How do we
Yeah.
identify that? What are some of the common sources of incidents? How can we find the pattern there and address those? You break that, create that as a solvable problem and define
Hmm.
that. So I think, and sometimes it's how do I work with cross-functional partners and understand what are the projects we even need to be working on.
Yeah, yeah. How do you influence like the map? And yeah, I mean it's all of the above. There's so much it's very cerebral, and there's a lot of strategy. Like I think when in order for you to be effective, like you really have to be thinking strategically on multiple layers. And I think for me what the interesting comparison I can make from like tech lead to junior engineer is like as a tech lead, like not only as a tech lead, even as a manager, like I like live my life in the ambiguity. uh you know what I mean? I, nothing is defined in my world. I'm often
Your
having
job is
to
creating
I
definition.
am my job is to make the shapes, to find the lines, draw the lines, get the cutouts, give it to the team. That's my job. That's like my primary objective is like managing the engineering delivery. And as a manager, that was my job. But like the manager bubble is a bit different than the tech lead bubble. There's like it's a Venn diagram. There's overlap. Responsible for delivery just in different ways, and you know, it's just I think as a junior engineer, you definition in your world in order for you to be successful. And I think like too much ambiguity for junior engineers is actually setting them up for failure or setting or not optimizing their path a little, right? Like I think it's like the more because you what you want for junior people is like you want to have as many iterations as possible. So how do you speed their iteration cycle? So you want to throw as many different problems like at them because solve, and the more they are like able to like pattern match and whatever else, like the more they're able to kind of accelerate their own learning and their own journey. So
Totally.
yeah, I like to keep it small and very defined for junior folks. And so and it's a win-win, right? Because like your mid-level or senior engineers don't want to do that work, you know. It's not
Flipping
interesting.
this around, if you are
Yes.
junior, right? If you are junior right now,
Yeah.
um, I think what Amel is saying is focus on getting your reps. Work on banging out
Yep.
solutions to as many problems as you can. Don't stress about those technical project management things that are going to come later. You'll get that later if you want it. But right now, the best way to advance is to get practice with your technical skills.
Yep.
And I think that's true for juniors, that's true for mid level engineers to some extent. And really, it's only as you start to get into senior where you say, you know what? Okay, lift your head up
Yeah.
and start looking at the other things that are going into this. Now, this isn't to say you can't be paying attention to that as a lower level engineer, but that's not how you're delivering value, and that's not the shortest path to advancement.
Yeah, I've so well said. And I think just to add to that, if you're a manager on this call listening, you know, like uh, I remember the first time. So I had a really great peer mentor at NPM, who was another engineering manager who we met every week and we kind of just talked. And he told me that like yeah, he's like, oh, I'm still writing software. I'm just doing it through people. Like I'm still building software. Like my job is still like to deliver a product. It's not just because my fingers aren't on the keyboard doesn't mean that's not my job. And I think that like hearing him say that really made me internalize that, like because when I was a tech lead, like just I got really frustrated that I wanted to. Some weeks I couldn't code at all because I'm just in meetings or whatever else. And my time is obviously much better spent doing those other things, right? Because it's like maybe they could find someone else to write this code, but like the stuff that I can do because of the context and the domain knowledge, etc. Like I am uniquely suited to do that. And so but I used to feel resentful about not being able to board, and it made me think, oh man, am I even an engineer? Like, what am I even, and it's like, no, I think, because you're involved in the process, and the process is inclusive. Like, it doesn't exclude, like, commit, like, it doesn't only require commits, you know editor, please fix that to make it sound sane. Like, I don't I was like, I don't know what I just said. It's like, anyways, but yeah.
So one other thing that I think is worth talking about here is that the question of, do you ever want to go beyond senior? I think there's people will look at this list of engineering IC titles and they say, okay, junior, I'm going to get starting out as junior. Okay, then there's mid-level. I'm going to hit that. I'm going to hit that as fast as I can. And then there's senior, and then there's staff, and then there's senior staff, and then there's principal, and then there's director or whatever. And they think, oh, I got to go to
linear.
the top.
Yeah.
It's linear.
Mm-hmm.
And that you really should go up there. And I think one of the things that I think, like, the big companies try to say this, they say we expect most people to stop at senior and not go beyond that, but they still make it seem like that's something that you should go beyond. And the thing to understand is they are very different jobs. Once you shift from senior over into staff, in most, at least at larger companies, but I think in some smaller companies as well, the type of work you are doing is very different.
Yeah.
You are often doing much more of what, Amal, you're describing as not hands-on keyboard, right? You are doing much more influence, much more conversations and meetings and mentoring and all of these different things, and much less shipping code.
Yeah.
And it's okay if that's not interesting to you, right? Like, being a really effective senior engineer who can rock out code is an incredibly important and valuable role on any team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, just on that. So senior is I think the first title, like, where, like, it's okay for you to just be a lifer, like, you can be a lifer senior software engineer. No one is going to bat an eye. No one's going to say, why aren't you a tech lead? No one's going to say, why aren't you staff, or why aren't you this, or super senior, no, like, no one's going to care. You can park there, as KBall said. I think,
and you'll make good money.
Yeah, you'll make good money. And I think what I'm actually really happy to report, I'm seeing a lot less ageism in our industry. I'm seeing a lot, like, maybe 20 years ago, once they hit their 40s, they're out. Like, they're not like doing hands-on keyboard anymore. And now I'm seeing people, like, just like innovative stuff in our industry is coming from people in their 40s. So I'm just saying, it's, I think as long as you are willing to put in the work skills, you're good to go. And I think it's worth noting for staff engineers, principal engineers, etc., expectation that you can code, and that you are like, not only can code, but you code well. Like, like, you have to still be able to set technical direction for a team. But you just, it's this double-edged sword where, like, you don't actually have the time to practice that at work. And so I think that's where the kind of, like,
often the projects that you're doing are different, right? So, like, when I've worked as a staff engineer, oftentimes the coding that I'm doing is one of probably 3 different things. It's either prototyping, basically proof of concept. Can we go in this direction? Is there a chance this will work? Let me show you. Let me use this to convince you. Second one is glue work, right? This thing has been working terribly. It's nobody's responsibility. It's slowing all people down. I'm just going to rock it out because I can do it fast. I understand all the different pieces. I will make it work. And the third one is, like, really tricky, like, refactors or architecture stuff, or things where it's like, this is just like, oftentimes these are almost rescue jobs, right? Somebody's working on it for a while and it's just not coming together, and it's not working, and they're frustrated and they're giving up or ready to give up or whatever. And you say, okay, you know what? We could keep going back and forth, and I can try to coach you through this, and it will be here for the next 2 or 3 weeks. But, like, also I could just take this and rock it out. Are you okay with me doing that? And you do it, and it unblocks a whole bunch of other stuff.
Right.
But it's rarely the, like, day in, day out work shipping towards this next product.
Bingo. Yeah, exactly. And, and I think it's important to like be honest with yourself around what you even like. And I think it's, and maybe you're curious and you want to try it, and being able to maybe kind of sub in as an interim tech lead, maybe if somebody's on paternity leave or someone's on vacation or whatever, like if there's an opportunity for you to maybe try it in a low stakes way and see if it's something that you enjoy doing, that's good. I think like it's okay to just not dive in head first, and it's okay to not have certainty on if this is the right thing for you or not. um but I like, I think a good litmus is like, are you kind of naturally drawn towards like wanting to communicate and collaborate with stakeholders and like think about the bigger picture, or are you someone that's just really focused on like, I get a lot of gratification on like getting, building features, building things, moving things to the like that's more fun for me, so just
So let's
right or wrong here. Yeah.
let's talk about one more possible transition for folks, which is, we sort of said don't let yourself get pushed into management too early if you have people skills. But how do you know maybe it's time for me to move into management? What is that transition like? And is it, how would you assess, like, is this something I should try?
Yeah, I was on changelog like many years ago, and answering this question, and I was like, I'm just a boss, like I'm just bossy, like that's just just like that's just me, and I'm not actually like bossy. I take that back. It's not like in that way. Like bossy has such a negative connotation, but no, I'm just, yeah, I'm just, for me it was just like, it's just, I kind of know what we need to do and what the best way to get it done. And like I have a very clear path to the done line, and like I know, and I'm able to execute on it. And it was just getting, I just, because of that, I became, was just kind of always a natural leader in a group setting. But I also just, for me there was some friction in the past around like I didn't agree like a manager that I was like WTF'd about, or you know like I just it seeing a lot of bad decisions and things that were like I would have done it differently. Like that actually kind of fueled my desire to just be like, you know what, I can do this job. I should do this job, and then I did. And and it was a huge transition for me, one too, because it's a completely different job. Like, tells you that enough. Being a manager, yeah, you're like, you're on the same planet, but you're like, you have a different set of responsibilities and you have a different perspective. And yeah, it takes a lot to kind of take the icy habits out, and because like they hold you back from, I think, being an effective manager sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
how
think
about you?
so. It's interesting because I've done what I've mentioned a lot. I've kind of gone back and forth between management and engineering at different times. I think some of it depends on what's interesting to you. So, as a manager, as a line manager at least, I think there's kind of three big buckets of work. I think of it as one is like production, managing production. So this is like, how are we delivering work? How are we shipping software? How are we getting it done? There's process and organizational things. How are we organizing ourselves to get things done? How are we coordinating with other teams? Managing, our team functions, things like that. And people, how are we growing as individuals? How are we helping people grow? How are we managing relationships and those different things? The first bucket looks a heck of a lot like being a tech lead. A lot of times people's first taste of management is what people will call a tech lead manager, where they're tech leading and maybe they're managing a couple people as well.
Oh my God, I've
Um,
done that, and that was hell. Not
it's hard to
recommend
do
it.
both of those things a lot.
It's
It can be a
horrible.
reasonable way to dip your toe in the water, but it should at least be a transitory role on your way to full management, because you get pulled in too many directions. It's really stressful. Um, But I would say those other two buckets are things that you don't get to touch as much as an engineer. You get to you influence them, but they are less a part of your core job. And finding yourself getting drawn to those and spending more and more time, then you do something with that as you move up as a staff. That's on people, that's on growth. You're spending time trying to say like, hey, we're not working well together in this. How do we fix this? If that's the stuff that's exciting you, that is like the meat and potatoes of management. And so if you're finding that to be like, as you're rising in engineering and that's calling you and you're starting to work on that and you're like, oh, this is interesting, this is fun, uh, it might be time to try managing.
Mm, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I think it's, you know, for me, the most rewarding part of being a manager is I think the direct impact that you can have on people's lives, not just their technical knowledge. But you get to kind of just, I don't know, I'm like a manager coach, you know, I work for my team, not the other way around. So I really emphasize like career development for people who report into me. You know, I really think deeply about like what they're working on and what's gonna get them to the next place that they want to go to for their career. And, you know, and so just kind of being able to do that, like it feels it's just so rewarding. And it's like the best part of my job. So yeah, I think have both worlds for me, which is, you know, being part of, you know, being able to influence the delivery process and our norms and cultures in a way that's a bit louder, because I can maneuver, and my job is different from day to day, week to week, because I'm focused on different things at any given point. I have the same set of responsibilities, but I'm, you know, in terms of like what big problems am I, that's different, you know, maybe we're helping define a big new problem through discovery, and I'm kind of figuring out dependencies and trying to align with other teams, you know. Maybe I'm trying to kind of tackle some tech debt planning with my team, and, you know, we're trying to figure out how to weave in a bunch of re-architecting work, like architecture work. You know, so my responsibility is really very day to day. And I think for me that's exciting. And I think for me, like the longer term goal was to kind of move into a director role in a few years. But honestly, like I'm having a lot of fun doing this right now. So I don't see myself wanting to do or make that jump just yet. I'm not even ready, but right now I'm just eager at like trying to kind of like become the best manager that I can be. So that's kind of what I'm focused on these days.
Yeah. One final thing that I'd love to get your take on, um, is so one thing that I've seen, especially as you get to higher levels of engineering, but even to some extent in management, is that like people will describe a role, but you can co-create that, right? Like there's things you will need to get done that you're responsible for that are what people's expectations are, but like how you fit into an organization, and maybe this is just true in smaller orgs because that's where I live my life. I don't really do large orgs, but like the exact details of what you're doing and what you're focused on and what um, you know, your job as a staff or later engineer is to create impact and
Hmm.
to drive the organization forward. And what that looks like can be very individual. You can co-create that with your manager and the teams around you, um, and you know it's not a one size fits all role. And so I think one of the things that I run into with folks is, you know, in those early stages, it's often like people are telling you kind of what to do. Like you're working on this, you're doing this. Like it's coming down from above. If you move into the later stages of your career expecting that to happen, you're going to flail. People
Hmm.
are rarely going to tell you what to do. It
Hmm.
is your job and also your opportunity to work with the people around you to figure out how you are going to drive impact.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a great way to end it. So, yeah, I mean, we could talk all day about this. I mean, we've really just scratched the surface. So, maybe we'll kind of do a follow up in the future and kind of go deeper on some areas. So, just tell us what you want to hear about. We'll try to answer it without getting sued by any former employers. I already kind of dished some dirt today that I'm like, oh man, I hope this doesn't bite me in the butt. But I don't know. It's my experience. So,
Awesome.
but-
Well, in that case, let us call this a show. Thank you, Amal. Thank you, listeners.
thank you.
JS Party. Catch us every week. We're partying about JavaScript, the web, and software engineering careers.
Yes.
All right. Take care, y'all.
You're back on video.
Just in time for dancing.
I know. That was
All
a
right.
fun show.